want to go ahead and dig back into the Gospel of John on chapter 19, which it seems kind of weird to me and yet also appropriate that after Easter, we kind of dig in and really want to find in the story about Jesus' crucifixion and then his resurrection. Just find the meat that God has for us in that. Because it's not just a story. It's like, oh, hey, that was nice of God to do, and then we go on our way and live life like normal because it was never intended to be that way. The gospel is something that's meant to change our life, and not just change our life. It's meant to rebuild it from the ground up, and it's kind of like God takes some of the pieces of our life, and what was an interior wall is now an exterior wall, and vice versa, and it just rearranges things. But it comes out so much better than what we ever designed it, because what we learned is that our best plans are miserable failures. And the way he rebuilds things, there's a symmetry, there's a beauty through his redemption, through the mess we've made of our lives. He takes it and he makes it something good and beautiful. I love it. So in chapter 19, we kind of come to really the darkest day in all history. And I know most of the world like barely hiccuped and noticed. They're like, hey, what's the sun going dark? And that was it. And that was all they really noticed. But in Jerusalem, the world was being changed. And time has come to notice the importance of that event. And we can tell that most easily because of what year we say it. We say it's 2025. Well, you see more and more often the term CE after year. And so they'll say 2025 CE. And that stands for current era. And they're trying to be inclusive and politically correct and include other religions. And, I'm not trying to offend other people with that, but it's the current era because of Jesus Christ. What he did on the cross revolutionized the world more than anything else ever has. I mean, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was basically they were talking about how these days in the halls of government, whether it's United States or elsewhere, usually at some point in time they're going to address the question of, okay, what can we do to help out the poor, the needy, the people who are underserved, underprivileged, and certainly in our government, the Republicans and the Democrats have different ways of trying to tackle that question. But they're asking that question. It used to be, before Christianity, the question was, will we bother to help the poor? Will we bother to help the needy? Will we bother to help those who are crippled or anything else? Because those people were looked at as a drag on society, that we're worse off because of them. So maybe instead of helping them, we're going to eliminate them. And without Jesus Christ, that's the way the world was. And I don't care what continent you go to, that's the way it was. And while there were pockets of people trying to help out, for the most part, those people were viewed as weird. Now we have hospitals with Saint in their name, Saint Joe's, Saint Jude, Saint whatever, because of people like named Jude or named Joseph who were changed by the gospel story. And so they wanted to help people who needed help. They did such a bang-up job that they named a hospital after it, or maybe a whole string of hospitals. Jesus revolutionized the world on what he did on the cross. the message that he taught was legitimized by what he did on the cross. Because he showed that love isn't just, hey, I'm going to help out when it's convenient. Love is, I'm going to help even when it hurts. Even though it means sacrifice on my part, I'm going to help. That's the love that Jesus showed us. And that's the love he calls us to. And chapter 19 is all about his trial and his crucifixion. In chapter 20, we get into the hope, but for 19, it's all about this darkest day in history that split time in two. So let's take a look. We're not going to get all the way through the chapter by any stretch, but I'm sure that wasn't a surprise to you guys. In John chapter 19, we're going to start at verse 1. Let's get into it. So John chapter 19, verse 1 says, Then Pilate had Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip. Soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They put a purple robe on him. Hail, King of the Jews, they mocked. Does that sound familiar, Justin?
A little bit.
Elijah?
Yeah, a little bit. Don't make me say it again.
Oh, come now. You must be no. Hail, King of the Jews, they mocked as they slapped him across the face. Pilate went out again and said to the people, I'm going to bring him out to you now, but understand clearly that I find him not guilty. Then Jesus came out wearing a crown of thorns and a purple robe, and Pilate said, Look, here's the man. When they saw him, the leading priests and temple guards began shouting, Crucify him! Crucify him! Take him yourselves and crucify him, Pilate said. I find him not guilty. The Jewish leaders replied, By our law he ought to die because he called himself the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was more frightened than ever. He took Jesus back into the headquarters again and asked him, Where are you from? Jesus gave no answer. Why don't you talk to me? Pilate demanded. Don't you realize I have the power to release you or crucify you? Then Jesus said, You have no power over me at all, unless it were given you from above. So the one who handed me over to you has the greatest. And Pilate released him. But the Jewish leaders shouted, If you release this man, then you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who declares himself a king is a rebel against Caesar. When they said this, Pilate brought Jesus out to them again. Then Pilate sat down on the judgment seat on the platform that is called the Stone of Pavement. In Hebrew, Gabbatha. It is now about noon on the day of preparation for Passover. And Pilate said to the people, Look, here is your king. Away with him, they yelled. Away with him. Crucify him. What? Crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar. The leading priest shouted back. Then Pilate turned to Jesus. All right. So this is an interesting chain of events because you take a look and we see Jesus getting his final trial. Now, if you've read the other Gospels, you kind of know that Jesus went through numerous trials. He went to Annas, we see in the Gospel of John. Others talk about him being tried before Caiaphas, before the Sanhedrin. You see Jesus being tried before Pilate. I don't know why I say Judas. Who's wrong? And then Judas basically says, I don't find him guilty. Go try him in front of your king, King Herod. What's that?
I said Judas again.
It's going to be one of those days, isn't it? Okay, so try to lock on to what I mean. Climb inside this freaky head of mine and trying to understand what I'm trying to say, not necessarily what you're hearing. Hey, can you do that for me? Turn on your psychic ability somehow. Yeah, I'll try to be a little more careful today. Okay, Pilate sent him on to King Herod. Okay, Herod was the Roman appointed king of the Jews. Okay, and then Herod had some fun, and he sent him back to Pilate, recognizing that he's done nothing wrong. But more importantly, he wanted nothing to do with crucifying basically a current celebrity who had done lots of good and lots of people supported. Herod wasn't interested, so he sent him back to Pilate. And Pilate tries him again. And so John kind of combines, kind of leaves Herod out of the picture. He wasn't that important to John's mind. And kind of combines these two trials that Pilate had into one. So you kind of see the first part of it, he gets tried, and then he brings him out, clothed in purple, beat him, and then people aren't satisfied with that. He's brought back in again, and Pilate questions him some more. Trying to get to the core of this charge that people want him crucified for. Okay? And it wasn't about him claiming to be king. That was what we call a trumped up charge to some degree. Now, he was kind of claiming to be a king, but he was, as Pilate questioned, if you guys remember from chapter 18, he's saying that my kingdom's not of this world. I'm not in competition with Caesar. That's what he's really saying. I'm not trying to take anything away from Caesar. I'm not trying to do that. So Pilate was like, okay, you're fine. Go on, be crazy on your own, okay? And he was satisfied to send Jesus out just like that. But the people were not. Pilate had a mob. And I want to kind of help you understand, because while Jerusalem and Israel kind of weighs big in our mind because we were raised in a Christian culture, make no mistake, this is kind of the fringes of the Roman Empire to some degree. It does go further, don't get me wrong, but still, this was not a major place for the Roman Empire. This is kind of a backwater station to some degree. And Pilate was not a heavily favored Roman official. Matter of fact, he kind of married, I think, the grandkid of one of the Caesars. And so they're like, you can have Jerusalem. Okay? You can have the surrounding area there, and you can rule there. And not only was it kind of a backwater station, but it was a backwater station full of people who really heavily resented the Roman occupation. So you're dealing with uprisings kind of regularly. Normally it's like you conquer a place and maybe there will be another uprising later and they'll put it down, and that's pretty much the end of things. People learn, okay, Rome's too strong, we can't do it. Jerusalem was not bent that way. They were contentious all the time. If there wasn't an outright rebellion going on, then there was the quiet rebellion going on. That was them. So this was not a highly favored place to be stationed. But Pilate's doing the best he can. And he gets Jesus into that. Well, let's just go ahead and dig in. Let's take a look at what happens in this section again. A little more deeply. It says, verse 1, then Pilate had Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip. The soldiers wove a crown of thorns, put it on his head, and they put a purple robe on him. Hail, King of the Jews, they mocked, as they slapped him across the face. So we see Pilate has Jesus flogged. And this is bad. This is not just, oh, we'll lift him a couple times and leave a couple red marks on his back. It's tipped with metal. It's tearing up his back really bad. And it wasn't just like one or two. It was, how many? I don't know. Not what?
39.
Okay.
That's the way they would give them.
Yeah, 39. Okay. So literally the order is to beat him within an inch of his life. If it's 39, 40 was a death sentence, and 39 was basically, like I said, beat him within an inch of his life. So he does that, and they dress him in a purple robe and put a crown of thorns. Now, I know usually what you guys see is that nice little kind of circlet, nothing nice about it. Nice, long, like 2-inch long thorns or something like that. And what was most likely is that it looked more like a helmet of thorns. So it wasn't just around the sides right here. It was all over the top of his head. And it wasn't just like, oh, hey, let's gently place this on your head. It was jam it down. So he's bleeding profusely on his head. And if you guys have ever had, well, let me tell another story. My fourth grade teacher was Hawaiian, okay? In the middle of Utah, I don't know how the heck he ended up, how Hawaiian ended up in Utah, but in small town Utah. There he was. His name was Mr. Nairita, okay? And there was one time he was telling a story about he was out with his family, chopping wood, and piece of wood, large piece of wood, apparently went and cut him in the head and actually got lodged in his skin. Didn't pierce the skull or anything. And his family's freaking out because he's bleeding a lot. He's like, don't worry about it. We'll just head on into town and I'll go clean and they'll fix me up. Oh. He was calm, but his family was not because he was bleeding a lot and he had a piece of wood sticking out of his head. That's kind of freaky, I gotta admit, but he was calm and collected and he wasn't worried. And they just got something to help stop the wound. But the thing is that one place bled a lot. Imagine you got like, say, 20, 30 or something thorns poking you. Not just poking you, but like I said, being jammed down on your head. He's bleeding a lot. I mean, it's going down his face, it's going down his spit, all over. That was his experience. That was his crown of thorns. And they clothed him purple, and they've beaten him, and then they bring him out in front of the city. And Pilate's trying to get away with what little he can do. Okay, he knows that the mob is worked up, that they're passionate about this. So he's like, maybe if I make this guy so freaking miserable, but don't actually kill him, maybe we can get away with that. And so he brings Jesus out and says, hey, look, behold the man. That's what he's saying. Look at this guy that you guys are wanting. Isn't he pathetic and horrible and hasn't even been punished enough? And people are like, no, we want him dead. We want him crucified. And so, verse 4, Pilate went outside again and said to the people, I'm going to bring him out to you now, but clearly understand that I find him not guilty. Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the robe. And Pilate said, look, here's the man. When they saw him, the leading priests and temple guards began shouting, crucify him, crucify him. Pilate's response says, take him yourselves and crucify him. Pilate said, I find him not guilty. So Pilate is trying what he can so that he can release Jesus. He has no desire to crucify him. He doesn't even really have a desire to have him flogged or anything. He's just trying to pacify this mob at his doorstep. Okay? That's it. He knows that Jesus is innocent, but he's willing to punish him anyway to try to get out of the ultimate execution, the ultimate punishment, which is execution. And he sees the crowd isn't going to let this slide. They're still shouting, crucify him, and he's just saying, I find him not guilty. In verse 7, the Jewish leaders replied, by our law, he ought to die because he called himself the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was more frightened than ever. So why was Pilate scared? Because he knew this crowd was not going to let him go. This was as big an offense as they could have, that he had set himself up as Son of God, the Messiah, God in human form. He understood the culture he was in well enough to understand this was dangerous territory. So he knows he's not going to get away with what he's done. So he goes in here and his thought is, I'm going to question Jesus and I'm going to see if this is true. And if we can find a way to wiggle out of this, we'll do it. Okay? We'll wiggle out. But if not, if Jesus says that it's true, then basically I'm going to have to do this. Because otherwise, I'm going to have a riot on my hand. I'm probably going to have a rebellion, and then I'd lose my job. If I don't lose my life in the rebellion, well, then Caesar's probably going to make me wish I were dead. So, that's kind of the situation as it is. So, verse 8, when Pilate heard this, he was more frightened than ever. He took Jesus back into the headquarters again and asked him, "Where are you from?" He's not asking about Nazareth, okay? He doesn't care about Jesus' family and where he lives. He's asking this question, basically, are you from heaven? Okay, this is not a small question. Where are you from? But Jesus gave no answer. Why don't you talk to me, Pilate demanded? Don't you realize I have the power to release you or crucify you? So Pilate's frustrated. Then Jesus said, "You would have no power over me at all unless it were given you from above. So the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin." So he's basically saying, Pilate, yes, you have the authority to do these things, just like you said. But your authority isn't from Caesar, it's from God. God has authorized this to happen. It's just, again, considering he's the Son of God, and he knows the charge. And Pilate can tell there's something very different about Jesus. This is why he's asking these questions. He didn't come in and just ask, are you really claiming to be the Son of God? No, he's like, where are you from? He wants to know a more substantive answer than just, are you crazy enough to think that you're the Son of God? He's wanting to know, really, no, where are you from? Where's your point of origin? It's like, and I could almost hear Pilate saying, and don't tell me Nazareth. Because I ain't buying it. That's the way it goes in my brain anyway. Jesus basically says, hey, you have no power over me, it's going to be from above. So the one who handed me over to you, which is Judas, okay, has a greater sin. Then Pilate tried to release him, but the Jewish leaders shouted, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Now, this is just such crap, quite honestly, because they didn't care about Caesar. They wanted Caesar out and forgotten. They would be happy. Matter of fact, if you guys remember Palm Sunday, right? Just a few days in front of this, they're cheering as Jesus comes in. Why? Because they want him to be the Messiah, but they wanted the Messiah who was to come in, ask everyone to pick up a sword and throw Rome out. That's what they wanted. They were gunning for Caesar. But now that they see Jesus is not interested in a rebellion and that he is claiming to be Son of God, suddenly they're like, okay, we don't want you anymore. You're a rejected Messiah, basically. And so suddenly they're willing to take Caesar as king. Suddenly now it's convenient for them because they know this is what Pilate needs to hear in order to authorize this. This is the only reason they care about Caesar. So they're playing it up. It says, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who declares himself a king is a rebel against Caesar. When it said this, Pilate brought Jesus out to them again. Then Pilate sat down on the judgment seat on the platform that is called the stone pavement, in Hebrew, Gabbatha. It was now about noon on the day of preparation for Passover. And Pilate said to the people, look, here is your king. Away with him, they yelled. Away with him, crucify him. What? Crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar. The leading priest shouted back. They have an end in mind, and they're not willing to settle for less. Jesus is going to die. Pilate knows the truth. He knows Jesus is innocent. He's found him innocent. He's questioned him 2 or 3 times, and each time he's like, this guy's done nothing wrong. I want to let him go. But the crowd won't let him. So he has a choice between basically making a decision that will release this man and start a war, or kill this man and satisfy the crowd. So he does what he feels like is the best solution, but it's not the right thing, and he knows it. Verse 16, then Pilate turned Jesus over to them to be crucified, so they took Jesus and gets into the crucifixion story. That's as far as we're getting as far as scripture goes. But this is Pilate's do the right thing and suffer the consequences, or go with the crowd. Pilate had that choice. And although ours isn't necessarily a life hanging in a balance, this is the sort of thing that sort of dilemma we face all the time. Are we going to do the right thing? Are we going to stand up for Jesus? Are we going to say who he really is? Or are we going to be silent? Or are we going to go with the crowd or whatever else? Because there's that pressure. And sometimes the crowd isn't even trying to exert it, but we feel it anyway. Because we understand people don't really want to hear about Jesus. Nobody wants to be told, you're a sinner. You need to change your life. And you can't do it. Only Jesus can. That's the gospel message. It's offensive to people because it tells us, hey, we're screwed up. You can't do anything about it.
Ross Torch been mostly, and just back then like it is today, that happens where it doesn't look like we think it should look. Is the biggest problem is because we have this idea in our head how it's supposed to go. When it doesn't go that way, then we're like, no, it couldn't possibly be because it's not going the way I think it should. Yeah. The church and everybody, does that same thing. Kind of scary.
It is. So many times we get a preconceived notion in our head. We lock onto that because we feel like it's the right thing. One pastor who's dealing with that sort of thing in his church right now has got a dilemma that the previous pastor created. No major crime or anything was done, but things were not handled well, and so it caused relational problems within the church. And then another person, not involved in the problem, came to the ruling body of that church and basically said, hey, this is the way you need to deal with it. And
but that went over well.
Yeah, basically the ruling body disagreed. And so this person came back again. Basically said, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, you're doing the wrong thing. And while I admire somebody willing to stand up for good things right, ultimately part of living in a community, especially a community of followers of Jesus Christ, means that we kind of have to get along to some degree. We stand up for what is right, because there's some dangerous territory there. We just go along to get along. When there's clear scriptural things that are violated, yes, we have to stand up. And if church leadership saying, well, then, sorry, then we stand up even stronger. But there's lots of things that are kind of gray areas that's kind of like, well, how are we going to handle this? How are we going to deal with the problem? And, it may not be the way that you want it done, but it's still being dealt with. And, we can usually in those circumstances, get back off and say, okay, that. And it's the same sort of thing what you're talking about. We know the right thing to do. We come up with, or we think we know the right thing to do. We've got the right way to handle a problem. We just stick to our guns. And it
It's all about pride, basically.
often, very
The
often,
root of it is pride.
yeah. Man, it is. It can be such a hard line to figure out sometimes. You think you're absolutely right, and so you stick to your guns. And that's a good thing. But if you're not willing to at least hear people out, see why things are being dealt with differently, there's a problem. There's certainly no harm in hearing things out. At any rate, that is to some degree what Pilate's dealing with. People coming to him with a preconceived notion. That's the only way to do it. And so he knew the right thing to do. He found Jesus and said, okay, well, you guys do what you want anyway, all right? I'll put my stamp of approval on it. He goes, sits in the judgment seat, and basically declares that Jesus is the Son of God. It wasn't the right thing. Pilate knew that. He went along anyway. So I just want to kind of bring that forward and just say, hey, what are the situations you face where you know the right thing and you stay silent, or you go along to get along, all kinds of different ways you can mess things up. But when God shows us the right thing to do, makes it clear, as Christians, we have an obligation to stand up and take the hit that's going to come from that. Maybe that means a loss of business. Maybe that means getting fired from a job. Maybe that means losing a friend. Maybe that means losing a family. I don't know what it's going to be. We can do our part to try to be at peace with all men, as the Bible tells us, but ultimately, we aren't in control. There's only so much we can. What are we going to do when that time comes? There's going to be something, but almost certainly that this week it's going to come up. It's going to be maybe just this in the smallest way it could possibly be. But it's still going to come down to you have a choice between the right thing and the wrong thing. Let it slide. We can stand up for what's right. We can go through, follow through, do the right thing. We're going to have to face that every day. So I know this is the sort of thing, especially the smaller it is, the more likely we are to let it slide. But this is still Pilate's dilemma. You know the right thing to do. Okay, stand up for it. Because you'll notice that he said, you've been given the authority from above, and so it's the person who handed me over to you who's got the greater sin. Implied in that is that Pilate is still sin. Not that he had a bigger part of it, but he still had a part. I don't want any part of that kind of a mess. I want God to look at me and say, okay, you did the right thing. Good job. Maybe next time I won't. Maybe next time I'm going to compromise. I don't know. I want the next time we face these dilemmas, step up and do the right thing. Right. Lord God, I come to you and just thank you for who you are, what you've done, for your Holy Spirit in us that convicts us of sin and leads us into all truth and just gives us what we need in order to know the right thing to do. So give us all the information that we need in order to make those right choices and strengthen us to do it and to suffer the consequences that may come with it. It's an imperfect world. So there's going to be times that doing the wrong thing is going to be what's celebrated. Doing the right thing is going to be criticized. We need you to step up and do the right thing. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you've done. Thank you that you give us what we need. I want to be like you. I want to be able to do the right thing at the right time. I need your help to do that. So do we all. If it means consequences, so be it. I'll just take those consequences gladly. Or with your consequences, really the consequences for our sin. Cross was all about me and my mess ups, not you. But anything you did for me certainly wasn't. You were perfect. You are. So help us. You need you. It's in the name of Jesus that I pray.